Everybody ready? We'll go ahead and call the commission meeting of February 18th to order. We're going to start the meeting with a moment of silent reflection for first responders and members of the armed forces, followed by an invocation by Pastor Steve Jones with the Vero Christian Church, and then the Pledge of Allegiance by Commissioner Peter O'Brien. If you would please rise.
Our Father in heaven, we thank you for this Board of County Commissioners and ask your blessing upon this meeting. Help them to faithfully discharge the civic leadership that you have entrusted to them. May their deliberations and decisions contribute to our ability to lead peaceful and quiet lives in this county, lives marked by godliness and dignity. For we know this is good and pleases you. This we pray in the name of the one God and mediator who can reconcile you and humanity, the man, Christ Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. They moved it on me. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We'll adjust that later.
Well, you know, it used to be over here.
I'll get it back.
That's okay, there, I just gotta get used to it.
All right. As far as the agenda goes, if it's all right with you guys, I would like to move my item 14A1, thank you, under discussion, public 10B2.
Yeah, comparative item. I don't know, your other item is a pretty big budget hit. I don't know if we should be moving stuff around for you like that.
I know, but I wasn't gonna move that one, just the first one.
Good to be the chair.
Are there any other additions or deletions to the agenda?
Madam Chair, move approval as amended.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. First item on our agenda is going to be proclamations and presentations. We have an introduction of School District of Indian River County Superintendent Dr. David Moore. Dr. Moore, welcome. We're happy to have you here.
Hey, let's give him a little.
Thank you. So I will be brief. I know you guys have not a lengthy agenda, but sometimes one item can take a long time. So just want to take the opportunity to introduce myself, give you a little bit background on the work that I've been doing here in Indian River. It has been a busy 2 months for me. Had the opportunity to visit all of our schools at least twice now, dig into what's taking place in classrooms, evaluate the current level of instruction, and speak with teachers, speak with administrators, speak with members of the community regarding the great work that is being done and the great work that's yet to be done in Indian River County Public Schools. There are great opportunities in order to continue to build on some of the great things that I've seen and align our priorities. And this is a opportunity to do complex, meaningful, hard work. And it can't be done in isolation. It can't be done alone. It needs to be done in partnership, ensuring that together as a community we are aligned regarding what is important to the needs of our children and how we provide systems of support in order to ensure we hit those outcomes for our kids. So over the last 2 months, I have been greeted, I have been thanked, I have been warmly welcomed. So for me and my wife, this has been a great opportunity to come to a town who's truly embraced us and truly embraced the expectation that all children, regardless of the school that they're in, can receive a quality education that allows them to walk into a building, feel safe, feel comfortable, feel loved, feel as if the weight of the world falls off their shoulders. And as a result of that, they can connect, establish relationships with the adults in those buildings, and really begin to do great things, both at the school and ultimately modify or excel their trajectory of their own personal life. There's work to be done. There is work to be done, and I'm looking forward to connecting with each and every single one of you to continue to do that work. Some of our priorities are to ensure that in Indian River we have the highest paid teachers on the Treasure Coast. If we're going to continue to ensure to create that environment in which I just briefly spoke about, we need to ensure that we have the absolute highest level instructors who are supported, who are embraced to do what is God's work. This is the closest things to God's work outside of a church that I can truly connect with. Other is to ensure that our classrooms no longer are sitting in rows where children come in, sit, and they do the same thing. There's 22, 25 different students in a classroom. We need to ensure that we're creating spaces for them that brings teaching and learning to life. Creating classrooms where students are engaging, they're connecting, they're using technology not only to solve problems, but to define problems that yet don't exist. And then finally, we need to ensure that as a community, we come together and we provide opportunities for all children across the entire district to have opportunities to identify what is the appropriate education for me. Expand opportunities to provide choice for all parents in this district. Creating opportunities to define and create educational spaces, themes, academies, magnets that meet the needs of all kids throughout the community. So this has been a very, very busy 2 months. Still a lot of work to do, but I couldn't be any more excited to have the opportunity to be part of this community, to be in service of this community and in service to the children in this community. So thank you for having me. Thank you for allowing me just 2 seconds to come in and introduce myself and speak a little bit about the great things that are happening in this district. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Moore. And I'd just like to say welcome to the community, and we look forward to working with you in the future. Thank you for being here. We hope it's for a long time.
Ms. Orr? They said hope for a long time.
Not to put you on the spot or anything. Thank you. Thank you,
Doctor.
All right, our next presentation of proclamation will be honoring Major Milo Thornton of the Indian River County Sheriff's Department, presented by Commissioner O'Brien.
Thank you, Madam
Welcome.
Chair. Milo, I told you earlier, bring them all down. Come on.
Don't be shy.
Come on, y'all should be proud to come down and stand behind Milo. Stand with him. Good morning, Milo. Let me read this proclamation, and we'd love to hear a few words from you, okay? Yes, sir. This is a proclamation honoring Major Milo Thornton of the Indian River County Sheriff's Office. Whereas Indian River County celebrates African-American pioneers who, through their service in the business, public, and elected arenas, have paved the way for this and future generations. And whereas Major Milo Thornton was born on the Treasure Coast on February 13, 1978, and became a permanent resident of Indian River County in 1994 before graduating from Sebastian River High School and earning associate and bachelor's degrees from Indian River State College. And whereas, after beginning his law enforcement career in 1997, Milo joined the Indian River County Sheriff's Office as a patrolman and was swiftly promoted through the ranks of sergeant, lieutenant, and captain until achieving the rank of major in 2019. And whereas Milo is a graduate of the Command Officers Development Course at the University of Louisville's Southern Police Institute, a graduate of the Florida Department of Law Enforcement Leadership Academy, and a member of the International Association of Chiefs of Police. And whereas Milo has served as an adjunct instructor at the Indian River State College Public Safety Training Complex for 14 years, teaching topics such as introduction to law enforcement, criminal investigations, crime scene to courtroom, interviewing and report writing, and advanced studies in organized crime. And whereas Milo further contributes to his community as a volunteer board member on several nonprofit and charitable organizations and as a member of the Sunrise Rotary of Vero Beach. Now, therefore, be it proclaimed by the Board of County Commissioners of Indian River County, Florida, that the pioneer spirit and civic contributions of Major Milo Thornton have greatly enriched Indian River County and the Treasure Coast, and that the board extends its sincere thanks for his outstanding efforts and trailblazing career with the Indian River County Sheriff's Office. Adopted this 18th day of February 2020, signed, endorsed by all 5 county commissioners. Major, awesome job. Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to first start off by thanking the commissioners for presenting me this proclamation. Special thanks to Sheriff Laurel, who could not be here because he's away on business. The men and women that standing beside me, command staff, Chief Harpering, all the men and women at Indian River County Sheriff's Office, my family, friends, and most importantly, the community who has supported me throughout this journey. I've told you guys this before, we live in a beautiful place. We've got great people that live here, and I appreciate everything that they've done for me and allowing me to serve this community. So thank you again on behalf of the Sheriff's Office and the command staff of the Sheriff's Office. Thank you.
Yeah, well, congratulations. You all come up too, get your picture, come on.
Thanks for joining us. This is great. Good to have everyone come down here today.
Again?
You'll be in the middle while.
Oh. No?
Congratulations.
Congratulations, Milo.
Always get them.
Madam Chair, I just want to say about Major Thornton.
Thornton.
He has unchanged through the ranks, and I think we're very fortunate to have somebody like him of his character rise through the ranks.
Your mic might not be on.
We are very lucky.
Yes. Thank you.
All right, our next proclamation is going to be a presentation of proclamation honoring Brother Jimmy Mackey, and I believe his daughter, Gail Clark, is here to accept. Welcome, Ms. Clark. Commissioners?
Good morning. I'm going to read the proclamation, and then if you'd like to share a few words, that would be great. Then we'll give you the proclamation. All right, good morning. This is a proclamation honoring Brother Jimmy Mackey, whereas Indian River County celebrates African American pioneers who, through their service in business, public and elected arenas, have paved the way for this and future generations. And whereas Brother Jimmy Mackey was born in the Bahamas on July 5th, 1918, arrived in Indian River County in 1944, married and was blessed with 6 children, 6 grandchildren, and 11 great-grandchildren. And whereas Jimmy was a lifelong contributor to the citrus industry in Indian River County, personally coordinating and providing transportation for workers who depended upon his efforts to make a living for their families. And whereas Jimmy continued his tireless efforts beyond the citrus season, driving busloads of workers to Virginia to assist with apple harvesting in the summer and the fall months. And whereas on such trips in 1965, Jimmy visited St. Paul AME Church in Mount Airy, North Carolina, and returned with the idea of starting a local choirs union. And whereas, with the help of Sister Eunice Jones, Jimmy established the Indian River County's Choir Union, was elected to the first vice president, and thus began a cherished 55-year tradition in Indian River County that continues today. Now therefore be it proclaimed by the Board of County Commissioners of Indian River County, Florida, that the pioneer, spirit, and civic contributions of Brother Jimmy Mackey have greatly enriched Indian River County and the Treasure Coast, and that the Board extends its sincere thanks for his outstanding efforts, adopted this 18th day of February, 2020. Good morning. Good. Anything else you would like to add about your father?
No, I have him out there with me, but he's like I said, he's almost 102. His health is not really that good, and
Okay.
he has Alzheimer's, so he's out there I don't want to bring him in here because he's kind of ill, so
Right.
I'm accepting his the proclamation for him today.
Well, great. Thank you. Give him our very best. And if you'd like to come up, we would be happy to take a
You're the chairman.
Oh, Turn will have your picture taken.
It's your show, not mine. That would be so cool, but
Do you want us to come out? He's in the lobby? Okay,
just tell them,
okay,
we'll go out there.
okay. Can we go out and say congratulations to him? He's in the lobby. We'll take a 2-second break to go out to the lobby and congratulate Brother Mackey on his proclamation.
That's really cool. Thank you.
You.
So, Bob, did you watch the race last night?
All right.
I didn't,
See the finish.
I did not. What time was this race last night?
If everybody could,
The guy that came in ninth was on his roof on fire, upside down. That's an accident.
You keep it a list?
I mean, it's one of the most spectacular
start one
finishes
now
you've
and
ever
I'll add
seen.
that. That would be
If you've ever seen any.
That made me feel.
I've already coached them up on it, Tim.
Well, it would be true that
All
it'd be one of the most
right.
exciting I've ever seen.
Settle down.
call the meeting back to order. We don't have any approval of minutes, but we do have an informational item, manufacturing boot camp.
And Madam Chair, if I may, I'd just like to pull this, and Helene Castletime from the Chamber, our Economic Development Director, is here, and just wants to spend a minute or two expounding on the the manufacturing boot camp, if that so pleases the board.
Of course.
Thank you.
Welcome, Helene.
Good morning, come on up.
Tell us all about it.
Thank you. Good morning, Commissioners. For the record, Helene Castletine, Economic Development Director with the Indian River County Chamber of Commerce. Thank you so much for putting this on your agenda and helping us get the word out about this great program. This is part of our business retention and expansion program, and what it does is provide an opportunity for high school students, primarily seniors, to give them a chance to see what might be out there after graduation if they're not planning to go on to college. We had our first year last year. We only had eight students.
Can you put the agenda item up on the screen, please? I'm sorry, Helene.
Oh, that's
Wait,
okay. Oh, you had the flyer, right. Any rate, so we are promoting the program again for this year. It's the boot camp is scheduled May 18th through the 22nd. It's a week long from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. It is free for all students, high school seniors, or for those who are homeschooled, for those who are finishing up their GED next summer. We want to be as inclusive as we can. And like I say, it's to give them an opportunity to see what's out there after high school if they're not planning to go on to college. Last year, we arranged tours of 9 manufacturers plus the CVS distribution facility. It was a very intensive week, but I think the kids really got a lot out of it. And we're hoping to make it bigger and better. We already have 11 students who have shown interest in the program, and I would like to announce that the online application is now available. If you go to the CareerSource website, which is careersourcerc.com, and if you scroll down to the bottom of that home page, you'll see an information box about boot camps. When you click on the box, Learn More, it brings you to that page, and then you do another click, and it'll bring you directly to that application. So the application process is open until May 1st. Again, it is a free program. We provide breakfast. The employers will provide lunch. I've got a great committee working very closely with the school district, of course, their career counselors, the CTE specialists. So we just hope to make it bigger and better every year. And I would like to take an opportunity very quickly to introduce John Karapi. John is now our new business retention manager. And eventually John will be taking over this program, but for the time being, he and I are going to work together on this. So we're right now putting together the itinerary for that week, but we are promoting it to the students, to the parents. We've already done some industry tours for the counselors and for the teachers who are involved in the career and technical education programs. So thank you for this opportunity. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them if you do.
Fantastic. Are there any questions for Helene?
Just welcome, John, and look forward to seeing more of you guys, and good luck with the manufacturing boot camp.
All right.
I know last year it got started and was pretty exciting, but really like the idea of this and giving the kids that hand-on experience, and hopefully, get them in those careers where we need people to fill those jobs. So.
One thing I didn't mention, we also have a component where they'll be learning some soft skills. It's a computer model. It'll be instructor-led, so they can learn things like teamwork, communications, how to show up to your job on time.
Put your cell phone
things
down
like that.
for 8 hours.
Right.
I know.
All right, thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Helene.
you so much. All right, our next agenda item is the consent agenda. Would anybody like to pull anything from consent?
Madam Chair, I'd like to pull item 8E.
All right, anybody else? Anybody from the public wishing to pull anything from consent? Seeing none,
Madam Chair, move approval as amended.
I have a motion by Commissioner Flesher, second by Commissioner Zork. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Commissioner O'Brien, item 8E.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This item relates to a community development block grant, and there's a list of 20 applicants that have been ranked for being awarded funding and such, and it requires the Board of County Commissioners to formally declare that we do not have any type of conflict with any of the people on the list, and this would be specifically any type of financial relationship or a benefiting relationship of some type. And I just thought, in talking with the county administrator, I think it'd be good if to pull this just so we could all declare that we don't have a conflict. I will point out that one of the applicants is a former county employee, Sharon Schlom from the MPO, and there's also another current county employee, Terrence Lee, talking again with staff that just because we know these people as a former or current employee does not create a conflict of interest. So with that, I'd like to go ahead and just from my point of view, I do not have any conflicts of interest with any of the applicants on the list.
Okay. I have no conflicts either. Commissioner Solari?
No conflicts, Madam Chair.
Commissioner Flesher?
And Madam Chair, for the record, I am on that committee, and I am familiar with both of those individuals. I clearly discussed that at the committee as well, and while I have known them to be working here, I don't know if they have homes or where they live, and I fully disclosed that and made it record at the meeting as well as here.
Okay, fantastic. Commissioner Zork?
Yes, the same, no, both of them, but nothing pertaining to the CDBG application, just their prior time here.
No conflict, all
No
right.
conflict.
And with that, Madam Chair, I'd like to go ahead and move approval of item 8E.
Second.
I have a motion by Commissioner O'Brien and a second by Commissioner Flesher.
I think
Oh,
maybe-
I'm sorry. Phil, did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I sure do. Phil Mattson, Community Development Director, longtime MPO Director. And after having spent 17 years with the labyrinth of Federal Highway Administration requirements and state DOT requirements, one of the benefits of this new job is, hey, I'm past that. And then I met HUD, so, and the DEO and the administrators of our housing programs. But let me tell you, though, that this was a revelation to me. Just like we hired competent professionals like Tyndale, Oliver and Associates and Cutter, Center of Urban Transportation Research, to help us make sure we're in full compliance on grants and so forth, we do the same here. Let me introduce Antonio Jenkins. He's with the firm appropriately named Guardian, and he's not only a grant administrator and compliance specialist, but he's our man on the ground for ship inspections and so forth. So we're very happy he came over from Lakeland this morning. If you had any questions on this, then he's going to go out into the field. And really, the last thing I'll mention, Antonio went over this very carefully, and I want to thank you for your diligence in pulling the item and specifically identifying the lack of any conflicts. It really helps these programs move along. We hope to do better things in the future, too, with our housing and move it up to the next level.
Thank you, Phil. Any questions for staff? No? All right, there is a motion and a second. All in,
I just was
Oh.
acknowledging it.
You want to?
all,
Thank you, and I would just like to add, it is required that the list be made public, so that's why we put it on the screen there. And I just want to reflect that it was on the screen for the record.
fantastic, thank you.
All right,
Thank you
very
guys
good.
for
Thank
keeping
you.
us straight.
All right.
All right, there's a motion and a second. If there's no more discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Our next item is constitutional officers. Supervisor of Elections, Leslie Swan.
Madam Chair, move approval.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Did you want to add anything to that?
Thank you very much.
All right.
I did want to say also, today is the last day to register to vote or change your party affiliation for the upcoming presidential preference primary election. So we're open till 5 p.m. tonight.
5 p.m. Go and see Leslie if you need to get registered or change your party affiliation. All right, there's a motion and a second. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Great speech.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Before we get into more lengthy discussion items, I see Chief Stone is in the audience. I think he has one very, very brief item that we can maybe take care of just as quickly. So if it's
Okay.
the board's pleasure, if we can move up item 15A1, which is the
Move
approval and
approval.
affiliation agreement renewal between Health Career Institute and Indian River County Emergency Services. I will be glad to second Commissioner Solari's motion, and with that, back to the chair.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. We do have a motion by Commissioner Solari with a second by Commissioner O'Brien on item 15A1. Is there any discussion or questions? Anything you'd like to add to that, Chief Stone? All right, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate that.
No problem. Thank you for keeping it going. All right, the next item we have is public discussion items. The first item is a request to speak from Mr. Torkeman regarding utility lien at 8476 63rd Avenue. Mr. Torkeman? Yes. Please come to the podium and speak your discussion item.
Okay, I'm not a very good speaker, and this is not my mother language. I speak 5 other languages, but I hope you understand me. My name is Turkmen, and I had been resident for Indian River County for last 35 years. And I'm a property owner and a landlord. My problem is mismanagement of the utility. They let the water go for a long time, years after years. And suddenly they hit me with a bill for $1,221. And we had this problem for a long time. I didn't mind to pay it when it was $200, $300. When before Mr. Joe Baird was the county administration, I told him my problem. He sent one of his lawyers, and they solved it once forever. They never, ever charged me for the previous landlord. Now, new administration, I got the same problem. They will charge me at least $50,000 so far. Here's a bill for $1,221.
Mr. Torkelman, we are talking about the lien at
That's what I'm talking
8476. Okay, well, I just want you to stay on topic because you're going down a road here.
No, I'm not going down.
Okay, so what is it that you would like us to do?
I got a lien. This is previous landlord. This is previous tenant. It's not my obligation to pay that. We have Florida statutes, and we got the county code. Here it is. I can read it. He said the landlord unpaid utility bills for which the non-owner customer is responsible shall not be a lien against the owner's property. So, this is your code.
Madam Chair, if I may interject, Mr. Torkelman has quite a few rental properties in the county, and we've had discussions on this before. The biggest problem is, in many of the cases, Mr. Torkelman does not require the tenants to put their utility bill in their name.
And in fact, I think he came to us about a year ago with a similar issue in which we told him the same thing.
And staff, I know Ms. Patton with Utilities Customer Service has told Mr. Torkelman this many, many times, that he needs to have the tenants put the water bill in their name. And then you would be correct. If the water bill were in the tenant's name, you would not be responsible for any of the water consumption charges. You're still responsible for the ready-to-use fee, that monthly ready-to-use fee. But in this case, the account was fully in your name. And so that means you're responsible for the entire bill. And Mr. Torkelman, we've told you this time and time again, that you need to put those accounts in the tenant's name and separate the two.
This is not, they're not supposed to be in my name. I never asked for water. I never asked it to put on my name. This is illegal. They transfer it to the landlord. I had more property in San Lucie County, in Washington, D.C. I had never seen this business like here.
Mr. Torkelman, on that point, again, Ms. Patton has told you many times that you need to have the water shut off, and then when a new tenant moves in, you don't get the water turned on. They come down, fill out the account application, and they get the water turned on, okay? But until you start doing that, we're going to continue to have this problem because the account is in your name, and that's the plain fact of the matter.
Okay, the problem is they don't shut off the water. If my tenant, I got a good tenant, a manager for Toyota, they shut off his water for $25. They didn't dish water for $1,250. If you don't pay your bill for 2 months, they're supposed to shut it off. Here's your county, here's your code. Here it is, I put it here.
Yes, I agree.
2 months.
And you get
now it could go for 5 years.
You get a written notice, it's in red on the water bill, that if you don't pay your bill, the water will be shut off.
No, the water is not off. The water on and on and on. This is go for 5 years. This water is on for 5 years. They never shut it off. And I don't have any authority to go shut off the utility for Indian River County. They have to manage their own business.
Mr. Torkelman, if the bill is in your name, you can go turn it off, and that's the bottom line. The bill is in your name, the charges are your responsibility. You can either pay them or there'll be a lien. And we've told you that before, we're telling you that today, and that's the end of the whole situation. We're not gonna argue about this.
I'm not arguing.
Okay, but you're gonna continue to have this discussion, and the answer is gonna be the same.
I
So,
wanted your word to go to the utility. I like that. If it's my name, I asked them to shut it off. I wanted that to give it to the utility department because they won't shut it off. If it's my name, you're right.
well, thank you for your comments. We appreciate you coming down and letting us know. All right?
It
Thank
would
you
be
so much.
great. Would you
All
please
right.
give it to the utility?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right.
Thank you.
The next item is going to be a request to speak from George Glenn and Ken Grudens, Dan Lansom, on the 2020 Conservation Bond Referendum. Welcome, gentlemen.
Good morning, Commissioners. I'm Ken Grudens, the Executive Director of the Indian River Land Trust at 80 Royal Palm Point, and with me today are, as you said, Dan Lamson, David Cox, and George Glenn, and also my colleague Dave Fuss from the Land Trust. And as you see in your packets, there's a number of these county's organizations, environmental organizations, that are requesting the Board of County Commissioners to authorize the chairman, Commissioner Susan Adams, to submit a letter to the Trust for Public Land, also known as TPL, requesting technical assistance and advice pertaining to the potential issuance of a new bond authorized by referendum for protection of environmentally significant lands in Indian River County. You know, looking back, the county has done an amazing job, wonderful job of land conservation through the Environmental Lands Program in this county, going back to 1992 bond and the 2004 bond. And the Land Trust had the opportunity to kind of pick up where the county left off in 2008 after the completion of the lands that it purchased up to that point. And we were fortunate to be able to acquire a lot of land along the Indian River Lagoon directly. And now here in 2020, there's a chance for the county to pick up where it left off in 2008 to continue looking at protecting the lagoons, watershed, lands west of 95 in the St. Johns River watershed, the Kissimmee watershed, the St. Sebastian River, remaining scrublands that are unprotected, the Florida ridgeline with the aquifers, and there's just a lot of land that have been identified and by a number of agencies and by nonprofits that still show the need for protection. And the Land Trust and the other groups that are mentioned in the memo are willing to raise funds to retain the Trust for Public Land to complete a feasibility study. And this feasibility study would generate, would look at revenue generation estimates, possible pathways for implementation, and it would include professional polling to provide information to all the nonprofits and to the commission to help determine what level of public support there could be for a referendum in November 2020. We're willing to raise funds, but a letter from the county commission, from Commissioner Adams, would trigger the availability of a national foundation grant to the Trust for Public Land to cover up to $30,000 of the total cost for the feasibility study, which you see in the proposal is about $51,000 for all that work, including the polling. And so on behalf of my colleagues, we respectfully request that letter to be sent to TPL. Any questions?
So this has been combined with my item so we could have a discussion on it. The gentleman did come and ask for, they want to move forward with the feasibility study. We need to have a discussion here. So with that, are there questions of Mr. Grudens or comments?
I guess questions and comments, Ken. Good morning, welcome.
Morning.
before they do any polling, I assume they're gonna have a more defined list of properties and an estimate of what the total bond issue will be and what millage rate will be required to cover that. So when they do call somebody, those are the things that need to be explained. I think if they poll and just say, hey, do you support saving environmental lands? I think a lot of people would say, oh yeah, that sounds great. But if the question is, do you support spending $500 a year, you might get a different answer. So I think before you do any polling, I think y'all need a lot more detail about what lands you're looking at, what the total bond issue is gonna be. I assume we're looking at another 30-year. Jason, would it be a GO bond like we did in the past, I'm guessing?
Yes, these would typically be a general obligation bond.
So it'd be a 30-year, and so I think we need to look at, what that payment cost is and how that would reflect on a tax bill, just so that information is out there before we go charging forward. Let me say, one, I'm not opposed to doing another bond issue, okay? But I think it's like when we do with our sales tax, when that comes up, we make sure we have a very good package of, what previous sales tax has gone to, that we have things to point at to the public, this fire station here, this library here, so they can see where those tax dollars went. And I think on another land referendum, we need to make sure we have that kind of factual backup before we go to the poll. As you
If I
all,
may, Commissioner, the feasibility study really does look at all that. It really tries to get at the economics and really sort of peel back the layers on what those options are. And the polling is professionally done, so it's not really biased polling. It's really trying to get a good feel
and
for
that's fine,
the
just
true
wanna make
nature.
sure
Yes.
that's what they do. Secondly, as I'm sure you know, and I've mentioned this when I met with Mr. Glenn and Dr. Cox, there will probably be a couple other ballot issues on the ballot for 2020. And when I've brought this up to other people that I talk to, one of the first questions I get is, well, what have you done with the lands you already own? And it's a fair question, and I think this board over the last few years, we've tried very hard to address that, kind of getting past the Great Recession days and now having some dollars available to put into those lands. In our 5-year capital improvement plan that we just approved back in December, over the next 5 years, we're gonna spend north of $11 million on conservation land improvements to better public access, boardwalks, parking, kiosks, trails, that whole 9 yards. And almost $5 million of that is scheduled to be spent in the current and next fiscal year. So a considerable amount of funds are going to be put into some of these projects. And a lot of them are gonna be some fairly high-profile projects. The Archie Smith Fish House in Sebastian, the Oyster Bar project, which we are in conjunction with you guys, and that's a great thing. I think it's great to partner. Jones Pier, the Krogel Homestead up in Sebastian, Lost Tree Islands, a lot of those are good, high-profile projects that I think when these improvements are completed would be a very good thing to point to say this is what we're talking about, what we want to do with the lands. So having said all that, where I'm at on here right now, I'll probably support, if Commissioner Adams can make a motion to write the letter under her matters, I'll be glad to support getting more information. I'm not sure, I can tell you right now that I would vote to put it on the 2020 ballot, and that's about as fair as I can be. I think there's a lot of other floating parts out there right now. I do think waiting 2 years until a lot of these improvements are done would be better. So that's kind of where I'm leaning, but I'd be glad to, move the feasibility study forward. So we do have at least more information to look at before we make a final decision. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
I know that you've placed this on the agenda. Clearly, it identifies the intent of desiring to move it forward. since you are chair and you cannot make that motion, I would like to make the motion to move this forward for you and authorize you to write that letter that's being requested by Mr. Ken Grudens.
Thank you, and I'll second that. And I appreciate that. And I appreciate your comments, Commissioner O'Brien. And Commissioner Solari and Commissioner Zork both have comments. We'll start
ahead,
with
sir.
Commissioner Solari.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So, not unlike some other issues, I'm going to be against this. I think this begins to take us down the wrong path, and I'll try to explain why. I mean, I'm going to go back, build some on Commissioner O'Brien's statements, and I'm going to go back to the Great Recession. And the Great Recession came, and it was just as I joined this body, and we were faced with having to cut down and make significant cutbacks. And coincidentally, the Great Recession hit just as we bought the last piece of conservation lands, which was a fine and good thing. But then, because we had to cut back so much, we did absolutely nothing with these conservation lands for years. Back in the 2012-2013 five-year plan, the last 4 years of it had $250,000 for the conservation lands one year, and zero the next, zero the next, and zero the next, which, in the big picture, we did the right thing by cutting back the way we did, because the tax burden on a large number of residents was really great. But when things got better, we did the right thing, and we slowly and steadily built up those funds till we got to the point, as Commissioner O'Brien said, we're spending $11 million in the next five-year plan. But beyond that, we bought other lands which are essentially conservation lands. Just recently, 244 acres for a water remediation area out by the wastewater treatment plant for $5.7 million. We took what would have been a development on Oslo Road and turned it into Osprey Acres, 89 acres that are now a highlight of the county. Both of these projects, I think Osprey Acres was probably about $5 million, and the project at West Waitlands is going to be another 5 years. So again, these things speak to me that these are an idea of a referendum where you then lock in and make inflexible the county's ability to change funds during a recession, show that a referendum's not necessary. And importantly is I'll note that there's no really great reason right now for another conservation bond, and we have to, again, say what the effect of it's going to be. Right now, conservation lands, open water, and designated open space makes up at least 37% of the county. If you add in other government lands, nonprofits lands, that lands are not taxed, you're now talking about at least 46% of the county land. We also have roughly 38% of the land in ag, and all of us know how that's taxed. It's taxed favorably, so it doesn't really supply much in the way of funds for the services that the rest of the community needs and requires. So that's 84% of the lands in the county, 46% basically already in conservation lands, and 38% with basically a very, very low tax burden. So 84% of the land contributing little in the way of taxes, leaving the burden, the tax burden, on 16% of the land in the county. And that's really as tight as we can make it and function. And I want to point out, we pride ourselves on being a low-density community. One of the impacts of being a low-density community is that you have limited revenue per land. You get a lot less revenue on two houses on an acre lot than you do with a 100-unit condominium on the same 2 acres. So your tax bill is changed. And I have Scott put this on. But again, things aren't in isolation. When we talk about a new referendum for children's services and a new referendum for land conservation. When the next recession comes, it's not going to be, people such as myself who live on the beach that are impacted. It's going to be the poorest half of our community. They were the ones who bear the greatest brunt of the last Great Recession, and they're going to bear the greatest brunt going forward. And I'll note, this is just one little example of many, but there are a few places now for half of Americans to live in this county. The wealthy do well. This is simply an example of the city of Vero Beach. The city of Vero Beach used to have homes that were affordable for people. But if you look at just the cost of new houses, so this is basically somebody goes in, wants a house, they go to the building department, and they say how much they expect their house is going to cost. When we go back to 1998, an average house being built in the city of Vero Beach was near the national average, roughly $200,000. Now the houses built in Vero Beach are between $800,000 and $1 million. So again, another section of our community is taken away from being affordable for the vast majority of us. And looking at what that and other things have had as far as an impact on the community, I'm just going to quote something from a future agenda item, and I mean today's. And there's an affordable housing issue. And it says in the backup for that affordable housing issue thing, which we'll talk about in an hour or so, quote, to quantify the issue, approximately 52% of 30,000 households in Indian River County do not have a high enough income, assuming an FHA mortgage with 3% down payment, to afford the lowest price market rate new home option currently available in the county or rent a market rate apartment. The problem gets worse when looking at projections in the future. Based on the census and county growth projections, there will be a need for over 5,000 new housing units by 2030 that will not be built by developers of market rate developments, homeownership or rental. The Affordable Housing Advisory Committee found that the reason that new homes are not being built to be sold to households with annual incomes of less than $65,000, and why apartments are not being developed to address income ranges below $50,000 to $55,000 is purely economics. So, I mean, while this type of thing isn't a tragedy for many of us, for half of us in this county, it will. This is the type of thing which will add just a few more homeless people to Indian River County, just as the Children's Trust will end up doing. So, again, I've supported buying lands while we had the funds, and it wasn't hurting other people. I was a big supporter of the 244 acres of the Wastelands property, a big supporter of Osprey Acres. I think I was the commissioner who pushed more than any others for 5 years to get the money we are now spending for conservation lands in the budget. I spent year after year working first with Joe Baird, if he's still here, and then with Joe. I mean, I remember the first conversation we had about that, and you responded very positively. And then with Jason Brown, year after year. But if we're going to service the rest of the members of our community, right, the elected officials of this county need that type of flexibility. The same type of flexibility we had in 2008 and 2009, we're going to need when the next recession comes, and it will come. And I'll just finally wrap up by noting that our flexibility is much less than it was in 2008. A higher percent of our general fund budget is now non-discretionary, and that is the same process that is had with state money and federal money. So when the next significant recession comes, it will be significantly worse than the last one. And again, I'm not going to suffer. I mean, Jackie and I are ready for retirement, and we will get along just fine. But I know neighborhoods in this community who will be so hurt that it will destroy lives. So I believe this is the wrong way to govern. I will not support this the same way I, going forward, will not support the Children's Trust. And I certainly hope that before this gets too far, this body will remember that we're not here to represent one special interest, regardless of how great its motives are. We are here to represent the community as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you.
Commissioner, may I respond?
Sure.
I'll keep it short. Thank you, Commissioner Solari. And, you know, I know that every cost of community service study I've ever seen across the country has shown that higher density and high rises and increased densities don't decrease taxes, and they only congest our roads. And I think any community in this nation that has taken the effort to conserve its lands and put lands aside to protect our water resources and to protect our scenic values and our wildlife hasn't regretted it. I would think that at the very least you'd support a feasibility study at no cost to the county to be able to have more information, you know, be able to say, okay, I don't have the crystal ball. I don't know exactly, you know, what the next recession might be. We all know there's always going to be another recession, but to have more information at your fingertips that's unbiased and truly looking at what this could mean economically, I'm just surprised, but thank you.
I'm going to respond to that because you, two things, well, one thing, you used the word unbiased. Do you remember one of the first times we met? I mean, it was up in the second floor of the United Way building. And that was about 2000, it was shortly after the 2004 amendment passed, last time for the conservation bonds. And you were, I was up there for one reason, you were up there talking with some other people, and the conversation you were having was about how we can work on the next referendum for bonds to buy more lands, and how we can word the referendum to get the result we want. So it's very clear, and it's very clear in polling, that the person who controls the language gets the result that they want. That was the same thing with the children's services. It's the same with almost every poll. So I'd be very happy to say, if you let me control the language, I'll support it. But to let the special interest group, which is all composed of all people who support it, control the language, which is what will happen, is not a level playing field. So again, I find your arguments unpersuasive, and will not be supporting this item.
All right, thank you. Commissioner Zork?
Yes. On that, Commissioner Solari stole a little bit of my thunder there. I was actually going to propose the county pay so that we do control the language for a number of reasons. As it was mentioned, you know, we bought a lot of land that the public gets to use one day a year. We made 2 purchases for roughly $23 million that the public access, I believe, is 1 day a year for up to 30 people. To me, that was not necessarily a great use of those dollars. I was also mentioned the high percentage of lands that are in the public ownership currently. Back to the language, the $11 million we have in our CIE budget going forward for 5 years still does not catch us up on the land that we've already bought and the commitments we were required to make or that we feel are appropriate so that we do have the public access. I would like to see something like a 60-40 split of whatever the dollar amount that's approved so that we have the capital dollars to then improve the additional land that we might buy. That, I think, is, if not, we'll buy $50 million worth of more land and we're still $10 million behind on making the improvements on the land we already bought. You're kind of creating a schedule that you'll never catch up on. Just last week, Fellsmere increased the environmental land set aside with a 300-acre purchase with Florida Communities Trust, which was great. It was also mentioned the new property we bought on 82nd Avenue. That's another few hundred acres. For members of the community, if you haven't, you can go online and you can get the minutes of the votes for the Paget Creek and the cattle ranch piece. And you could see there wasn't enough of dissident in the memberships that were voting. I was actually surprised to see who some of the people were that were not in support of buying development rights. To me, development rights would be potentially could be a formula if the value is X and you could buy the development rights for 10% of X, then maybe that makes sense to buy development rights. But when you buy land for the same value that you could buy the land outright for you and all you end up with is development rights, that's not a good equation. Also as soon as a piece of property ends up on a list as something we might want to buy, it's amazing what happens to the value. I use, for example, an ongoing purchase acquisition for 82nd Avenue. Most of that property is in the middle of nowhere. It has little or no value. Let's say it's $5,000 an acre. That would be on the generous side where some of this property is. But do you know what it's being sold for because of that's the appraisal? I don't know how they get these appraisals to come out. I know we struggle with this on closer in parcels on 66th Avenue. But if you could buy it for $5,000 an acre on the open market, why do we have to pay $20,000 to buy it for future road right-of-way? The willing seller process has to be, we're looking for property in an area that has certain environmental characteristics. If you have a piece and you're a willing seller, we'd like to have a conversation with you. Also, the list, I think, needs to be up front because the agenda items said have already been identified, but I've asked around and I don't have a list yet. And I'm in favor of doing something. I don't know what it is, but I think controlling the language, because you can get pretty much an outcome if we're all in favor of clean water, clean air, good education, great things for children's services, but it's how you word it so that the public actually knows what they're signing off on. And a lot of times you can get a great outcome that you could put in front of a public meeting and go, 90% of the people support this. But then if you look at the language, it may not have fully disclosed to the public what they're really getting into. So willing seller, something in a 60-40 split so that we're able to actually do the improvements after we buy something. I think that's just being prudent since we're still playing catch up in the tens of millions of dollars on the land we've currently bought. And it has to be property that's either, maybe it's something to set aside, open area that may not be designed to have improvements on it, but you can still walk on it if you want to anytime you want, unless there's some hazard and you have to fence that off. But having property that the public can't go, gee, I want to go see what the pond looks like on this piece of property. We may not have a trail improvement to the pond, but I'd still be fine with them going to look at it if we've used public dollars to buy it. So again, improvements would need to be tied in there somewhere. I think to get a opinion poll, are we in favor of preserving something? Well, the answer to that, if it doesn't come out at 90% or better, I'd be surprised. So I don't know why I would spend $51,000. I know there's other things in that $51,000 number. It's not just the opinion poll. But, you know, if you could show us a list and say, here's the 10 things we'd like to buy, and it comes out to X dollars, and these are all fee simple purchases, and here's the ones we'd like to do nothing on, and here's the ones we'd like to have improvements on, we could put together some type of a plan. Again, no development rights unless it's significantly a fraction of what the land's worth. But to pay the value of the land and only get development rights at the end, I think is coming up not good for the taxpayer. And let me see if I've copied Commissioner Solari's idea. I typed it out on 2 pages.
Very good.
Did you laminate it?
No, I did not.
There you go.
That's the Army Corps of Engineers does that. I think that covers most everything. So the first item I had is if we're looking at spending, whether it's $10 million or $50 million, we have the children's services, which is a much smaller number, and we're having a workshop for a half of a day. I think there's things that could come out of a workshop for this that would help flesh out things more. But to make this commitment, I think we would know something, but is it what we really need to know? And should you have a workshop to figure out? And I'm for writing the language.
Well, and I'm not opposed to having, the whole purpose of the feasibility study is to kind of answer some of these general questions that everybody has. And then if you want it, and I would remind that my understanding of the referendum process is that ultimately we have to approve the referendum, and therefore we have to approve whatever language if that is something we want to move forward with. And the way I understood, and I was not on the board when all those purchases were made the last time, through the LAC committee. I did get the pleasure of going on some site visits with the LAC committee out in the woods, but my understanding is the commission ultimately voted and decided which lands to buy and how those programs and sales were structured. So the feasibility study is just intended to get the information to then, if you want to have a workshop, I'm not opposed to that. And I do think that, as with the Children's Trust that's coming forward, that is our job to determine if it goes forward onto a ballot and what the language looks like. I don't think in any way this is intended, or at least from my perspective, to abdicate our responsibility in that realm. That was not the intention at all. And I don't think that's the intention of the group that's trying to put together a feasibility study. It's more to see if this is even something that the community wants, and if the time is appropriate, or if it is something that needs to wait, or whatever the case may be, just to get some extra information. And my understanding is this is what was done the last time the bonds were put out. It started with a feasibility study like this. So I know Jason had some more comments I didn't know.
And the
I
last,
have a question, because I can't ask him any questions once we leave here. So you mentioned that the Children's Trust was a much smaller number than this number?
Well, on per year, well, over time, it'll be a bigger number.
Oh, yeah, so have you heard a number for the conservation?
Oh, I've heard, they just wanted to do the same number of what we did before, which would be 50.
We have not come up with a number.
Oh, the group
The
that,
feasibility study will speak to that as well, so.
right.
Okay, because I'd imagine, for their number to be bigger than the children's land, it'd have to be a $100 million bond or something like that.
Right. And last thing that I did forget is that I know we had a lot of great partners on the LAC committee, but if there is a list that staff could score that list and bring it to us, I don't know if you have to go the committee route. And looking, again, and that's partially from the minutes from these meetings, that there may be I think people want to know what you're going to spend the money on before you spend it, not borrow the money and then you find out you bought things that people weren't anticipating. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Duly noted. Commissioner O'Brien, you had a...
Yeah, just, thank you, Madam Chair. Just want to kind of, in the big picture thing, addressing some of Commissioner Zork's comments about the, when we purchased the conservation easements on the land. You know, we're seeing a lot of these large landowners looking for value for their land. We see that with the Graves annexation in the Sebastian and the upzoning of that to industrial, commercial, and residential from ag. We're seeing that out there now in the St. John's Water Improvement District, where they're thinking about incorporating. And a lot of this is all based upon the fact that these landowners, with citrus in such a bad shape, that they're looking for alternative means to add value to their land. And then, Jason, I know that Triple Z had approached us about buying the ranch a while back, one of the two conservation easement purchases. Do you know, did that land ever sell or anything?
I don't know right now. We could.
So I would say that if it did sell, it wasn't going to sell for much, because the only, you know, think about it, okay, here's 1,000 acres, and all you can do is run cattle on it, and you have to maintain it and preserve it forever. You can never develop it. So basically, when we stripped those development rights off, the land, in my opinion, came down to a zero value. However, there was a way to give those landowners some value for their land, and instead of them putting rooftops on it like we're looking at now with Graves and St. John's, we still have open space. So I think we have to look at the big picture, and I don't think the conservation easements are a bad way to go, because if you'll look at our 5-year CIP plan, none of those parcels are on there. We're not having to spend money to improve them or maintain them or mow them or anything. Granted, the access is a little bit restricted, and I understand that, but I think in the big picture, you know, if we want more and more annexations to the cities that are willing to give it and upzone to rooftops and everything else, or these improvement districts incorporating and putting in rooftops, then we don't do this. If we want to continue to preserve the open space that Indian River County is known for, then I think we need to keep all those options on the table going forward. So just with that, I think we have to look at the bigger picture.
Commissioner Fleischer?
Interesting discussion. Thank you, Madam Chair. And I appreciate all the comments. I'm starting to get the idea that perhaps maybe Commissioner Solari would not be supportive going forward. However, I do respect what he stated. I do respect what Commissioner O'Brien stated. He said something very interesting, that he would be supportive and we can move forward, but we don't know what the final decision will be, if I'm correct. And that would be where we are at with another scenario that we have openly discussed, that there's another request for something to be on the ballot as well. So in looking at that, what have we done with the other request? The other request, we have had discussion, open discussion, a motion, something was on the agenda, and then now we're going to have a workshop. Have we moved forward? No, but we are learning, we are informing, and we are embracing. And ultimately, the decision for us for this to occur will be on this board. Correct, Counselor? We have the ultimate authority, absolute authority, for this to go forward. So if that's the case, why not give this the same value of the request and allow for it to be considered, and we will make that decision when it comes, and we'll have the same element of courage today as we have the same courage then to make the right decision for the betterment of the citizens of Indian River County. The only difference with that decision, making that decision today and not after the information, is an uninformed decision. And the worst thing that we can do is make an uninformed decision. So I embrace the fact that you would be allowed to write a letter so that we can begin to get the information, a robust, unbiased information, and then we could make that determination, and I'm sure we will make that determination. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I have one other, and a question.
Okay.
Okay.
If I can just let Jason speak for a minute, he's been trying to, and then we'll turn it back over to you, Commissioner Zorn.
All right, thank you, Madam Chair. Just a couple things. I think as far as moving forward on this, I think we will want to identify a couple of these things, like the structure. Are we acquiring fee simple only or easements? I think if there's polling that's being done, I think you should probably focus on that, because it sounds like there may be different thought here. I know there were some who weren't happy with the easements in the 2004 bond, so I think we will need to determine which way we're going, but I think you'll want to gather data to determine what type of public support there will be. I like Commissioner Zork's idea of setting aside a certain amount of the dollars for the initial improvements. Pardon me. The 92 and the 2004 bonds, those were authorized uses, was initial improvements, and we did some with those, but we got excited about buying the land more, and by the time we got done buying the land, there wasn't money left over for the initial improvements. But I do also want to mention maintenance. So we've got 3,800 acres that we also have to maintain. We have to keep the invasives down, because it's not good conservation land if it's overrun with Brazilian peppers. So we have that $11 million in our 5-year plan for the capital improvements, but as we install more capital improvements, we're going to have more maintenance. Some of these additional improvements coming forward are more active facilities with restroom buildings and things like that are more intensive to maintain and cost more. Also, as you go forward, we're putting in lots of boardwalks and things like that now. Well, 10 years down the road, you've got to restring those boardwalks and things like that. So I want everybody to be mindful of the maintenance costs to properly manage these conservation lands and to provide that access to the public ongoing, so it's not just a one-time cost, there's an ongoing cost there. And I think as we go, we should work on identifying types of lands that would be on the list. So just wanted to put those things out there to be considered as we go through this process. Thank you.
Thank you. Commissioner Zork for.
Yes, under the 51,000, do you know how much the public polling opinion is of that?
In the proposals in your packets, I believe it details that the Trust for Public Land memorandum dated February 5th, 2020, states that the
Okay, so 22,000.
public opinion survey is $22,000.
I personally think we already know the answer to that. We all within reason to some degree and with some limits are in favor of preserving everything. I don't know if you need to.
I beg to differ with you, Commissioner, respectfully. These opinion polls aren't just calling up and saying, do you like land conservation? They really drill down and get at the crux of the issues. They even will bring into the fact that there's another referendum potentially on the ballot. And they really they're professionally done and very neutral. They're not biased. And they really try to get down to it, because they do these year in and year out across the nation. And there are, truthfully, many times when the polling doesn't support it and the environmental groups or the county decide this isn't the year, as Commissioner Adams said. So I really think that you'd be missing a huge piece, probably the biggest piece, truthfully, for the 51,000 by doing away with a public opinion survey.
Do you know, do they use likely voters? Do they use just residents in the county? How do they vent their polling? Because unless you actually poll the people that actually have a 75% or greater turnout to vote on the election cycle you're on, you get a lot of background that looks good, but it's not who's voting.
Yeah, and I don't know the specific answer. I do know in these professional polls that they really try to do a true diversity of the polling that you would have at the polls. And these companies it's a third-party company that they hire to do this. So that's a hard cost. And I just know that it's very important information. I can find out more, but I think that I just know that it's very neutral and very broad-based to try to get that true sort of taste or test.
And just, I would comment that the Children's Trust group that came did their own polling that they presented to us, and we were in no way involved in that. And they did it before we had any kind of discussion. So at the very least, I would just acknowledge the fact that Mr. Grudens has heard our concerns and the concerns of staff, and will most likely ensure that the polling in some way takes that into consideration, because I'm sure he's quite aware if this moves forward and comes back to us, those are going to be questions we are going to want answers to. Exactly. So I'm pretty confident in that fact.
And I think with the Children's Trust one, they refer to a potential millage rate, but they don't equate that down to somebody's tax bill. And I think, so if we're going to borrow $50 million that cost, I don't know, depending on what the rate is, $125 million to pay back, or some number, whatever, the interest rates are low, so it's going to be not as skewed as the last one. But you have to really, I think, give them the whole story. And then also, I think, something that's 60-40, 75-25, something so that we buy land and then we can improve the land so we can use it. Understanding that some of it may be we bought just to keep as open space, but I tell you what, Paget Ranch, I don't know what millennium it would be in before there had been rooftops on that piece. The ranch, it now has a power plant next door, which is a great environmental asset, but who thought that was going to come in next to it? The ranch on 82nd Avenue was outside the urban service area, I believe. It would not have had rooftops unless it was 1 per 5 acres, which was also discussed in the vote language on that one, is how horrible would that have been if it was developed at 1 units for 5 acres. So I'm not against the development rights, but there's got to be an incentive formula. We have to buy it at a discount, not market value of what you could have bought the land for.
I'm going to make sure that Mr. Aberger from TPL watches this whole session.
Good.
He can really see what's being queried and what's being considered, so.
Thank you. All right, if there's no other comments from the commissioners, is there any comments from the public?
Morning, Commissioners, County Attorney, Mr. Administrator, and ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to make my comments brief and pertain them to one particular part of the subject that came forward, and that's development rights. Once again, Commissioner Solari, you tend to dampen the subject with facts, but we appreciate the facts. Going back about 13, 14 years ago, I think the only person that was on the dais at that time was Commissioner Fletcher. Remember the town of Broadmoor?
Brian.
Oh, Commissioner Bryan.
We came as a package.
Remember, I remember that very well. Remember the discussion on the town of Broadmoor out by Blue Cypress and the development rights that were bought and purchased and the discussion that went forward? Development rights can be of value if they're used properly as a business. I think if you're going to do a workshop, you might want to think about these development rights because there's a way that they can be used by the county for future development to regain some of that investment that we have on that property. And I think that just make a development right something that's to put to bed and to kill a development right, as Commissioner Zork said, isn't the way I would look forward is conducting it as a business. Conducting it as a business and putting those in reserve for future development where people need more density and we can recover that cost process by selling those development rights. And that can be done. We had a great discussion on that about 13 years ago. So I think we want to look back into that before we just skip over the development rights. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else from the public? All right.
Madam Chair?
Yes.
Before
Quickly.
we do the vote, is this then to move it forward and then we would potentially have a workshop to review the data?
So this is how I envision it. If we move it forward today, they will do their feasibility study through the Trust for Public Lands. They will, I would assume, because it's a feasibility study, they will bring it back to us, at which point I'm happy to schedule and work with staff to schedule some type of workshop on that so we can have a more robust discussion, just like we're doing for the Children's Trust. I would also assume that as the feasibility study moves forward, that they will reach out to staff and get their concerns so that can be rolled into everything and all those questions from everybody can be answered. This is, again, just the first step in treating it the same as we are treating the Children's Trust and is what the intention is. Okay. All right, so we do have a motion by Commissioner Flesher with a second by myself. If there's no more discussion, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Nay.
Motion passes 4-1. And if it pleases the commission, I just want to go ahead and do the 2 public notice items, and then we'll take a break.
Thank you very much. We have a notice of a scheduled public hearing, which will be to consider Citrus Hideaway Subdivision Water Assessment Project in Indian River County, Florida. We also have a public notice of a public hearing scheduled for March 3rd, 2020, to consider adopting an ordinance to enact Chapter 106, which is real property disposition procedures of the Code of Indian River County. Both of these are legislative in nature, and again, these are both going to be public hearings on March 3rd, 2020. With that, I turn it back over to the chair.
Fantastic. And with that, we'll take a 5-minute recess. All right, thank you. We'll move right on to departmental matters. The next item on the agenda is community development. It's condemnation, demolition, and removal of unsafe structure located at 530 13th Place. This is an item that was tabled on December 10th. I'll turn it over to staff. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. For the record, I'm Roland DeBlois, County Planning Director. I do have a brief PowerPoint presentation. As mentioned, this was tabled from the December 10th commission meeting. It has to do with a fourplex unit within Orange Terrace subdivision off 6th Avenue. The issue was a condemnation of a structure. County staff had posted the building as unsafe, and the owner advised to repair or remove the structure under a condemnation procedure based on the previous condition of the structure, which was essentially broken out windows, gutted interior, and unmaintained exterior. When it went to the board on December 10th, staff went into the meeting with a recommendation to proceed with authorization for condemnation. However, at the meeting, the owner showed up, and since the start of the procedure by staff, the owner took some proactive measures, such as replacing the doors and windows, and then gave an overview of their indication of difficulties they've had in maintaining the property and what their efforts would be to renovate it. And based on that action, it was also discussed that there was code enforcement board liens and issues that were unresolved at that time. So at that meeting, this commission tabled the matter till it went to the code enforcement board, which was scheduled and did occur on January 27th. At the January 27th meeting, the code board did consider the matter, and leading up to that meeting, but after this board's last consideration of this item, the owner did take aggressive actions to clean up the exterior of the property. And based on that, it was determined that the property was in full compliance with the code enforcement board orders where past liens were recorded. At that meeting, the board acknowledged that compliance and set the combined fines for the past code violations at $4,300. The other thing I want to note is that the code board meetings was a general discussion. Again, the owner, Ms. De Los Santos, attended. She had a explanation that she was planning to move forward, and she actually has since provided information to staff that she's hired a licensed contractor and is proceeding with the renovation plan. It was also discussed by the code board members that rather than tearing down the building, which otherwise is in solid condition, that it makes more sense to try to work with the owner, as explained to the owner, to bring it back online for potential workforce housing, which this could serve if it's renovated and occupied. But there's also concern that the owner has the responsibility to maintain the property so it's not an attractive nuisance to the neighboring residents. Just a few pictures. Again, this is a before. You can see the windows that aren't boarded in this photo are smashed out, so they were open. That was part of the pre-condition problem. They've since, the owner has since replaced all the windows. Also, the exterior of the building was in bad shape, and it was, again, not cleared, and it was an attractive nuisance for vagrants and vandals to the property. They have since cleaned it up. This is a before and after, and I was out at the property yesterday, and it's still in a relatively maintained condition, and it's secured. At the December 10th meeting, the board did, among other things, talk about what would it take to restore the building to a usable condition. And since that time, the county building official has come up with an estimate of timeframes for design, permitting, and restoration. And the estimates are essentially 30 days for the windows and doors, or to just pull that into the overall renovation permit. 90 days for the owner to obtain a design contractor and design professional to do the plans to submit applications, which he's already started that process and has a contractor on board. There's the permit review process, and then the actual renovation, construction, and completion estimated within 6 months. So within the overall year, that would be a reasonable timeframe for the whole process. The owner has indicated that they're aware of this timeframe. They have already started moving towards it and said they're committed to meeting that timeframe. And as I mentioned, what the owner has done since she appeared before this board back in December, she has cleaned up the property and secured it. She appeared before the board, had the fine set at the $4,300, and she's already begun to make payments towards that fine amount. She has hired a licensed contractor and has obtained plans to move forward with the renovations. And she's indicated that she understands the timeframe of staff estimates and that she's moving forward to meet those timeframes. Based on that information and based on the opportunity for the staff to re-cite the owner or bring it back to the board if compliance isn't progressed towards, we're recommending that the board would hold off on the directing staff to proceed with the demolition at this point. But again, with that understanding that if the owner does not progress with the renovations, staff will bring this matter back to the board for the demolition authorization. Thank you.
Thank you. Are there any questions for staff? Yes, Commissioner Solari.
Roland, you mentioned that a partial payment had been made. Can you tell me how much that partial payment is? The first of two questions.
It was just an initial payment. I believe it was just between $100 and $200.
Okay, also that's de minimis. That's basically nothing then. So when will the next amount be due? Or when will by what time will the $4,300 have to be paid by?
It's not due, it's a set amount, so it'll be a lien against the property, all real and personal property she owns until it's paid.
So is there, I mean, we're letting her go forward without building, and we don't have a requirement that she pay before going forward?
No, that payment and fine amount that was set was for past violations. If it falls out of compliance again, we'd be opening up to a whole new round of fines, daily fines. But as it stands, the fine is a lien against the property until paid. And it's not a condition of payment before issuance of the permits at this point.
But don't we have the flexibility to make it required at this point?
We can. We typically, it's not something that the board does. It's a fine to promote compliance. We don't typically tie it as a requirement before permits are pulled.
Thank you.
It's not in this case.
Other comments from Commission?
Madam Chair, I'd
Yes.
be glad to go ahead and move staff recommendation. And I understand Commissioner Solari's concerns about the fine, but in this case, to me, I think every dollar available going towards the restoration would be a better use of each dollar. And at some point, the lien will come due, but I'd rather the owner be able to direct every available dollar to, speeding along the restoration. So that's why I'm in favor of moving this forward.
All right, and I'll be happy to second that.
And just for discussion, at this